little window in it because I don't think it's an easy, short conversation. We might need laptops to pull up some stuff to get some real answers. So I want everybody to be mindful of that as we talk. That sometimes we don't have fact checkers always, but we're gonna do our best at it. My name is Jeff Carroll. I am a writer and filmmaker. I do science fiction and horror, and I just released my first comic book. And thank you.
Awesome.
And I and have halfway finished writing my first video game for phones, and it's with the same character from my movie.
Awesome.
So I have a character in my movie that's in the comic book, that's in going to be in the video game, and that came from a short story that I wrote. So all of that together on a low budget level or
Awesome.
independent. And next we have Kenneth. Kenneth, tell us who you are.
My name's Ken Shannon. I am a RPG novelist, RPG designer, novelist, and I'm also primarily, at this point, a board game designer, and so board game and RPG designer. And I've also worked with comics to a degree and have my name on 2 or 3 of them, but with my friends, generally. I'm a secondary editor. But yeah, that's my gist.
All right, and Alvin,
I'm Alvin Mullen. I'm the editor, publisher, and owner of Myriad Paradigm Publishing. Just started a couple years ago. Got 2 anthologies out. The first one actually won this year's Silver Medal Award from the Florida Authors and Publishers Association.
Congratulations.
Sci-fi fantasy. Young adult. I don't really consider it young adult, but I made sure it was PG-13 so that it could be considered young adult by somebody.
Okay, and then we have Tony.
My name is Tony Finkelstein. I'm an independent producer for film and an avid comic book and sci-fi nut.
All right, we got a nut, an awardee. Oh,
Which one? I was trying to turn it off. That's
oh my
awesome.
God. Okay, now at the end, and James.
My name is James. I'm with Tassus Publishing. We also produce anthologies, but also deal with fantasy world building. My background that I like to inject into my world building is through my past of anthropology and history, so diversity and understanding growth within technology is important. And as I say, our slogan's building new worlds one word at a time, so it's important that there's a thought to the process of going forward.
Okay, so now we've met everybody. A little bit of ground rules. I have a whole lot of questions I want to ask everybody. Okay, so this is more of a group interview than it is a panel, okay? And we're not going to get to everything. I'm going to answer them because I know you guys are long-winded, and I'm going to keep it short. Or let's say just very thorough, right? How about that?
That's fair.
What?
You
I
asked
am
to be
too.
succinct.
Right, and so I may skip around because you may answer a question that I have already. So my first question, since sci-fi began, we had a role that we played in society. Star Wars epitomized it, and sometimes people have said sci-fi is where we test drive new ideas. How do you see the purpose or the role of sci-fi in society before we get into other stuff?
Sure.
Okay.
So when I look at sci-fi, I've always thought about it, the hard sci-fi aspect of it, which is I'm an engineer. All my life is looking at new ideas and concepts. So the gist of it is, I perceive that, especially in the 50s and 60s, sci-fi was a niche, but it was a niche that explored the unknown, both on the political level, but also on the technological level. Look at communicators becoming cell phones, etc. So I believe that that, as compared to now, we have sci-fi has become part of the main pop culture. So I think sometimes it gets lost into the main, what we're currently interacting with, instead of looking way past it and seeing how do we move and say, here's where we are. What could be completely different that's better in the future?
So you're looking at it as continual problem solving.
I consider it a continual problem solving. How do we make our lives better in the future, and what do we have to worry about to stop? Because technology can be used for good or evil. Right?
So now he's got the engineering element to it.
Yes.
Alvin, how do you see it? What is your background?
I'm a computer network specialist.
Okay, so you're another type of engineer.
Yeah, and I've always liked the harder sci-fi, but I've also always felt that not just along with the what can we do better, how is technology going, that sci-fi's, one of its main things it's always done is the social implications of what's going on.
That's
Not
where I
just-
remember you from. We always
Yeah.
agree on that. That's a good answer.
It's not just the diversity or gender roles, but as a warning, like what technology can go bad. I mean, a lot of old sci-fi is like, hey, you push stuff to extreme, this is how bad it's going to go. And it's
Right.
kind of a warning. So sci-fi has always, to me, been part of both, here's what can be very good, or here's how it can go bad. We need to pay attention.
Yes.
Okay.
And I actually think you mentioned Star Wars. I think when we've hit Star Wars, we've kind of lost that because there's not as many lessons in Star Wars as there was in Star Trek and Heinlein and Asimov. And
1984.
Possibly.
1984 being probably.
I don't like to think about that.
Yeah,
It's too
I
close to
don't
reality.
even think of Lord of the Flies either.
That's right.
So Tony, what you got?
Well, today.
Yeah, it's, you know.
Tony, what do you see? What is sci-fi's role in society? Why do we need it? What is it?
I've always thought of science fiction as what could be
Right.
and what's going to be.
Okay.
Like I say, I'm an avid comic book. I mean, I was brought up on Superman,
Okay.
as you can tell.
Oh.
My biggest hero was George Reeves.
Okay.
Very nice.
And Superman, when he was created by Schuster and his buddy, I forget what the other guy's name
Simon.
is.
Siegel. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Schuster and
Simon,
Simon, Jesus.
Schuster and Siegel.
You're
That's a
publishing.
was two little Jewish guys who kept getting beat up's way of saying, this is what the future can be and should be. And when you talk about diversity, Superman was diverse because you're integrating an alien from another planet into Earth's society as Earth's protector.
I never really looked at Superman as futurism. That's interesting.
Well, he
It's
came from
because
another
he came
planet.
from our past.
Yeah, or he
Right?
just never brought anything other than himself,
But
to
he
do.
came from another planet.
And he
that
didn't
was-
know his culture.
Right.
He had to be
Right.
reminded of it
And
all.
he came by rocket.
Right. It's not like Wakanda. Wakanda's got a responsibility to the rest of the world to share their technology. They never said, all right, Superman, start sharing some of that technology.
Right. Of
course,
We,
he was a baby.
we
He
need
didn't
a
know
better
his own
refrigerator.
Yeah.
I think at the time though they were also trying to demonstrate like we're in the middle of a war,
Right.
And they're saying, here's a man. All this conflict is showing because people are coming home dead.
Right.
So they're saying, what did these guys die for? And then Superman shows up, and the reason he said the American way originally
Right.
was, what is the American way?
So he was like a Captain America.
He was a Captain America of sorts,
Yeah,
right? A representation
but-
of what we could be.
As far there's so much different kinds of science
Sure.
fiction.
Right.
Like he says, he's a hard sci-fi.
Yeah, the engineer over here.
Yeah, well, I should say I also believe in the social aspect of it too. It's just you asked
Yes.
me.
Yeah, but say-
So that's why
succinct.
he just contrasted.
Right.
you. He just added.
I'm a rocket jockey. Anything that takes place in outer space.
Ah,
You're in outer space, or Star Trek, Star Wars,
Battlestar Galactica.
Battlestar Galactica.
Okay, Expanse. Well, I'll win you with the Expanse. You can't go back on that.
can't.
You'll lose your sci-fi
Expanse is
The
card.
awesome.
original Battlestar Galactica
Okay.
wasn't bad. The remake,
So James,
we
at
won't
the
go
end,
there.
how do you see your science fiction publisher? How do you even find your role in society?
When I look back at science fiction, I see it more as a stimulator for potential growth for the future for people.
Okay.
And their advancements and what their studies, and what hopefully would be those that could fund it, what they would grasp onto. I think it's faded more and more as time has gone on, but I think it is those, not the hard science, but when it gets into the more questionable stuff, that it makes people think harder on it. Plus, it is a cautionary tale. It becomes a cautionary tale of what could be. Like you're talking, Black Mirror is fantastic for demonstrating that.
Sure, it's really nice.
Well, I'm going to roll into the next question. When we always talk about where it started, we can say in different cultures they may have different examples, of science fiction. But we go back to Frankenstein. Mary Shelley's book. Is that sci-fi or is that horror or are they both? You know, is it a horrific science fiction story? And it's cautionary, you know, and maybe exploratorily cautionary, but more so cautionary than anything else. Sci-fi has hit a barrier. There was just an article that said that cyberpunk is dead because we are still thinking of the same cyberpunk we were thinking 30 years ago.
Become steampunk.
Right.
Yeah.
And steampunk is retro. So now it's almost going backwards. And a few years ago, before the diversity call went out, it felt like we were going to be trapped in an endless remake series. And so my question is, have we run out of big questions?
Oh, no.
You know, what are some of the big questions that we still have left to ask ourselves in sci-fi or in the world that sci-fi can answer?
All right.
So, okay, whoever wants to take that on, what are the big
I'm happy to
questions
go
that we
first
have
if
left?
I have to, because that's a big one. I think one of this one is going to not be necessarily controversial, but I think it's an interesting one.
Okay.
Is that we have society is currently we are large, but we're also connected.
Okay.
So my idea and your idea
And the
might be
internet,
much
or the internet.
closer than we were, say, 10 years ago or
Okay.
50 years ago, right?
Yes.
So groupthink happens very quickly. One of the problems, my mom is a biologist, so I'm just going to do this very quickly. But basically, if you look at society and all of our thinking, we're getting closer and closer together. The problem with that is that we oftentimes will hide away the things that are different about ourselves and say, oh, well, that's not real,
To fit in.
to fit in. So one of the places that sci-fi can jump is to look at the questions that are uncomfortable now. Because what's happened is we've all become, what the sci-fi of the past did was make us all think kind of egalitarianly, all about ourselves. Now, one of the things we can do is look at what our differences are and talk about, well, how can we move forward and look at our differences and say, those differences are beautiful, and that's okay.
So that diversity stuff wasn't political; it was just evolutionary because that became the last question in the room.
Right. So now the next question is, what did we lose by becoming egalitarian? What can we learn from what we've lost? And can those stories tell us something new about ourselves?
So robots are over with.
Right.
We going back to hard
maybe.
social questions. What do you think, Alvin?
Unfortunately, I think a lot of the questions we've talked about in science fiction, as a matter of fact, Star Trek was all about not just diversity and melting, but individual cultures. And we're still asking the same questions because we haven't moved near as far forward as we should.
Okay,
It's
so
taken a long
we've
time.
slowed down. That's why
But
sci-fi.
on the
hasn't
other
gone
side,
further.
from the technological aspect, we've got the idea of the sci-fi future of where are we going to be in the future? I mean, with global warming, and are we going to have bodysuits to live on Earth? And I mean, I know this has been done before, but not that much. I mean, and maybe back to the old style space type stuff with colonization and that, because that's as a cautionary tale, like we better do this or else.
Okay, so downsizing was a real exploratory sci-fi story. Okay, Tony, what do you think?
That's kind of a multifaceted question.
Well, give me
Be
one.
succinct.
Give me one question that you
Okay.
think is one of the top three that Tony thinks is a question that we need to role play in sci-fi.
Well, you talk about new ideas.
Okay.
Most of our country, and I don't know if it's good or bad, gets their ideas from Hollywood. You know,
Okay.
what's the current movie? Oh, that's cool, let's do this. But Hollywood hasn't had an original idea in 20 years. They keep recycling old stuff.
Right.
With all the amazing stories.
So
Except for Black Panther.
So there are no new ideas coming out, except for in sci-fi literature. And I was brought up on Asimov and Clarke.
That's my next question. So we're gonna go
Yeah.
to
Say,
literature.
I mean,
I was assuming that was going to happen.
Yep.
iRobot to me was like, ooh,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. And
Ender's
as
Game
far
was-
as Clarke goes, I think his best book was Rendezvous with Rama.
All right. So James at the end. And I'm gonna start with you the next question. So we're gonna go reverse. Okay. Just to break it up.
I'll go with the flow.
I want you to feel important.
To me, I would actually harken back to the groundbreakings of gaming, as you brought it up.
Yes.
I look at Shadowrun. If anybody's ever played Shadowrun, they were heavy into
That's
bio-
cyberpunk, right?
But it was. It wasn't.
It's
So there's-
sci-fi fantasy.
Right,
Okay.
sci-fi fantasy.
Okay.
Where it branched into both BioWare
Cyborg
and
elf.
cybernetics.
Okay.
So now they're finally just coming out with that, I think, a subdermal piece for phones that will go underneath your skin. Yeah, exactly. So most people are reticent because they've never been exposed to it or the thoughts of how well it will work when
Which one?
dealing with
Subdermal.
the
Oh, yeah,
subdermal,
they've already-
the phone part where they have
Sure.
But so yeah, and that's where it also, I think there becomes that where as the generations go by, they stop at a certain point of allowing growth into those unless it's very capitalistic in the businesses that are developing it, or whether it's just that the market's not there because the people who have the funds to buy it, to spend that kind of money, won't buy it. So they're still held back at least a couple generations.
So what you're saying is John and Luke were our first sci-fi writers from the
Yes.
Bible? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Mark of the Beast.
There you go. I won't say what I usually say about the Bible, but let's
You do
just
what you need
say
to do.
I appreciate the science fiction and fantasy that's in it as well, and I draw a lot of influence from it. Okay, now you're rolling right towards my next question, which is kind of getting us ready for the main question because I wanted to get us set up. I wanted to build us a little context. I'm thinking about a video game when you said literature, because I'm a filmmaker first. That was the first creative element that I did. And I do agree with Hollywood being stagnant. But my son is a video gamer. And he's read young adult literature, but that's still literature. And then we've gone into Halo, which was his first big video game. And I started looking at video game storylines, and the questions that they're answering are not in Hollywood.
Yeah, that's really.
They're not necessarily in books either, although a lot of things were already in books. It's just a lot of stuff in books hasn't been rewritten because you're copying somebody if you do it over again. So let me ask you, give me some good examples in video games, role-playing games, outside of movies, of what sci-fi that you like in those areas of questions that they're answering. I hope you understand what
Yeah.
I'm saying. James, you understand where I'm going with this in terms of, I don't know if you do anything other than literature, but, there's some, there's things happening, especially in our RPG games,
Yeah.
because they're still writing new scenarios.
And the world building that goes into it.
Yes. So, do you have any examples? I mean, I give me a second. I'll think of one. But do you have anything that made you go, that's pretty cool? I haven't seen that in a movie. Haven't read that in a book.
I know that the social structure based on the technology, like in Destiny,
Okay.
like where you're dealing with one person versus another, and the technology then describes your process of moving through life on what you do, how you do it. And I think it will become almost a determiner of where your place in the social structure in the advancement within technology.
I think you hit it. One of the things that we are now exploring in sci-fi is your ability to guide your own story. Your ability to have your own experience. That first-person shooter, I remember when I played full Metal Gear.
Yep.
It was just the storyline. And then Halo and Call of Duty brought the free world, and you could just go and do different things. And then you had Grand Theft Auto, which I think had an impact on a lot of these other games, but it allowed you to create your own narrative.
And so did the Elder Scrolls.
Yes.
To go fancy.
Sure.
Yes. So, and that's all role-playing games do, is allow you to have your game master create your story, but you still go about the goal your own way. Anybody else? Alvin, Tony?
I have one too.
and you talk about doing this from a gaming standpoint.
Yes.
I'm not a gamer,
I'm not that much.
okay?
either.
But
Video gamer.
first-person shooters, I mean, my favorite was Wolfenstein.
Okay.
That's how far back I go.
Okay. Yeah, that was fun. Good game.
But, you know, you go home, you shoot something, kill something for 30 minutes after work, and now you're relaxed and you're ready for the family.
You see, they brought
Yeah.
like Metal Gear brought in strategy, and then that element started to expand.
But-
You want to go, Ken? Go ahead.
There's one more aspect, though.
Yes.
You talk about, you want to do it from a gaming standpoint, from either video games or role-playing games, not so much from a literary standpoint.
Right.
But you fail to understand that no matter what you do, be it a video game, an RPG, a first-person shooter, somebody had to write it. So it
Same
all
thing with
had-
movies, yes.
So it all comes from a literary standpoint otherwise it doesn't exist.
That's actually both true and untrue, right? So I want to
Yeah,
jump to
'cause
that
I
really
don't want
quick.
to get it, to, but
So-
you can do it.
Well, you asked about games. I'm a game designer, so this is the one question I really actually want to throw in. So first of all, the game that I'm building right now is called Beyond the Edge. It works with Ed Greenwood and Richard Lee Byers, who just walked out. But basically, it is a massive, unbelievably large game where your choices change how each time you play.
Okay.
And so if you go down a darker route, you go down a darker route and become more evil, whatever. But I'm not going to go into those complexities. But they interact such that if you were playing a game with me and we jump over into his game, we can literally leave our game and jump into his reality because we move through time and space
With your characteristics.
with your characters. But
Right.
when you show up in his, he might be a benevolent race, and now you're joining his team like an Avenger for a while and being like an anti-hero helping him. And then you leave back. But what's interesting is that generates morality. But I wanted to touch on your point. RPGs are different. So that's a board game. And what I'm trying to do with that board game is trying to get people to think, because it's a future game, it's about space,
Okay.
about all the various types of ways to think. And then, those interact when you interact with other people, so as you play. But in an RPG, there's a different thing that's going on that does represent sci-fi, and it doesn't do it well in fantasy as well as it does in science fiction. And that is this. The GM is an ever-living present entity. So that person is generating feedback to what the characters are doing. So yeah, when they first run a module, somebody wrote it.
Right.
But a few seconds later,
You left that.
say, I'm going through the left door, and the guy didn't even think that there was anything behind the left door, so he has to think about it immediately. So the story evolves based on the group community. The second thing I wanted to bring up, so it actually is a social exercise into morality, and also into the future, and what we're thinking of what could be done, because people are coming up with ways of solving problems. Second thing I wanted to bring up was, and this is, I think...
Take your time.
He wanted to talk to you, I'm trying to be succinct. The other aspect of it is, when you think about how games work and function, you're right, somebody wrote it, but in an RPG, that allows, people are thinking past it. But here's where the beauty of a board game or an RPG is different than a novel. You can do it, but this way you can see interaction. As I might make, as an example, since you're sitting right there, I might play Black Panther in a sci-fi setting. Like, so Black Panther shows up and all of a sudden he's in Star Wars. But I'm perceiving I get to experience, and especially in board games and video games, I get to experience what it is to some small degree,
Right.
depending on how hard the GM's willing to do it, the social experience. Like if you were my GM, you might put me through a social experience I would never experience. I get
Or
to
thought
sit
of, right.
in your shoes for a second, or what you think those shoes would be, which makes me have to think out of the box of what my thinking is. Because everybody starts to think about what their life is and how the world is based on what they see. But in an RPG and in sci-fi, you all of a sudden are thinking about things not from your perspective, but from a better perspective or a different perspective.
multiple perspectives.
Which allows you to grow. And that, I think, diversity of thought, and what I mean by that is experience,
Right.
is what RPGs and board games bring and video games bring that a movie isn't going to necessarily bring. Because you can watch Black Panther on the screen, but you aren't Black Panther.
Right.
You don't get to say, what am I going to do in this situation? Do I kill him? Like the end of Superman, of this new Superman, it's not a spoiler.
Right.
He snaps the guy's neck, right?
Right.
He would never have done that until the early 80s. That was the whole point was, if you're so powerful that you can do anything in the world, if your morality is the only thing that holds you back, how do you solve problems? How do you not kill? So that was his. If you're put in those shoes, what do you do? Now you have to think about an experience that you would never be placed in, right? I can't walk down the street as a black man in America if I was playing Luke Cage.
Right.
But if you're my GM, you can make me experience some aspects of what that's like, and I might now have more empathy for you, which lets me think to the future on how I'd want us both to be able to find a merge.
Right.
And we start to think.
And my son plays everybody plays Fortnite, but there's another game I'm trying to remember, very much like Fortnite. Sorry, and I have my back to you.
Can I ask the question?
Yeah. Go ahead, and I'll come back to mine. Go ahead.
All right, well, what we were just talking about, isn't that what all novels do?
No.
Science fiction and fantasy novels? Sure, they put you inside someone else's head.
Sure.
Right.
But that's not the
Okay,
decision.
good.
That's
So
the
that
difference.
takes me to the
gonna
point
say
I was going to
something
make.
about
That's good, because I was thinking of that, but let me answer it with my point. He plays this game. It's in a post-apocalyptic world. He's got a hunt.
Wasteland?
Might be, but he has
Which
to
is
hunt
now called,
and cut
Fallout.
and he's got to hunt animals, and he's got to get points by the meat, and he's on a mission. So whereas with a book and a movie, all of that thought has been done for you. You don't get to play it. It's like a simulator.
Right, exactly.
That's the better example of it. It's like a simulator. And now you're using all of that science that you were given, and if you don't know it, then you hit information,
Yep.
and they give you a little breakdown of it all, and you get to learn what you need to do
Right.
to accomplish your goal. There's another one that I can't remember. It predates, it came out about
Borderlands?
8 years ago. Nope, but I'll tell you, it's cyberpunk,
Okay.
and you get every imaginable upgrade you can imagine. And you build your character. So now you're making your own superhero, you're making your own $6 million man to accomplish certain goals, but based on the character you design, you can only achieve those goals based on your abilities. And why I buy these video game Bibles to study up on weapons. It has so much stuff that just the information alone, it's very hard to put it in a book because you would bore people with the book. You're busy telling the story, so it's like the backup story to it.
Okay,
So
to go into both situations.
I hope that answered your question.
To go into both.
It did, that's a difference. I would argue that books are not boring.
No,
that wasn't the intent.
Not that, because I write books. I'm saying to do that.
Intent.
Here's what I would pose.
That would be boring in a book.
But
Yes.
the idea of you taking over and creating with the character, yes, that's the critical
Okay,
difference
there's-
between
to me-
passivity of a book and the activity of a game.
One of the things, the way to look at this is that all of these things are conversations. The book
Yes,
is a
yes.
conversation that you can't respond to, you just have to listen to. And generally, you're a ride-along in a book.
Right.
You're not
Exactly.
the person, unless, of course, you're going second person, which is difficult to read. But if done well, then you are the person. In the video games, you are often a ride-along or the person. It can be either way. And generally speaking, you're trying to look at a conversation to be more interactive in a game. And I think ultimately these games are all trying to get back to where Dungeons and Dragons has been forever. Because you sit at a board with a bunch of people, somebody's in charge, there's a conversation going on, and everybody has to think on their feet, including the guy running the game.
Well, go back to checkers, right?
Yeah, but I mean,
Yeah.
but with the role-playing game now, you have diversity, cultures, and all this stuff going on. And most of your video games are trying to get back to that because as they get boring if it's just you win or you lose. Because like I say, the only games I've ever really played much are either EverQuest, which is just free run, you do whatever you want, but the game interacts with you. Or one of the ones I thought was best game ever was Star Wars Knights of the Old
Battlefront?
Republic.
Oh, okay.
Knights of the Old Republic, because you became one of the Jedi, and you could go good, you could go evil.
You don't like Battlefront? You could do that with Battlefront too.
I truthfully have spent so much time writing and publishing.
Okay.
Since then, I haven't played any games that have come out in the last 10 years.
Now let me go
I
past.
actually have Battlefront.
Okay, and then I'll go past games. 'Cause I
As
got
a
another good question.
simplistic response to what you were saying, I exactly understand what you're saying, that you're putting them in the moment. But I pose what you're saying versus what's being said up here in that other response is the novel you're riding along. Now, what if we turn that novel into choose your own adventure? And then it's your choice at the end of a page how a response comes, and then that's
Which
the
chapter
path.
you go to next.
Right. Then that's where, if you're taking that moralistic stand to whether you killed a person or let that person live, and if that reflects that character, then that character changes by that choice, and then the novel continues.
And there is a guy doing
Sure,
those kind of
I
novels.
agree.
Yeah.
Novels are intentionally or unintentionally, novels are instructive. You're following
Exactly.
what the writer wants you to follow.
And now I'll give you a good example. Yes.
I disagree with that to a certain extent.
Which part?
The fact that the reader is always just following along. Because the reader will interpret, regardless
Oh,
of
yeah.
where you wanted the reader to
Oh,
go.
absolutely,
The
reader
readers
response
will
theory,
bring
sure.
their own experiences and stuff and will respond and react to what is on
Sure.
the page very differently. You can have three people read the same book and they will each have a different experience with that book because of what the reader brings with them.
But generally
It's
speaking,
called
the
reader
author,
response theory, and
Yes.
you could argue quite validly that everybody reads a different novel, even though on the page it's the same.
but generally speaking,
Because-
an author has a lesson or something he's trying to get across. Where in a game,
You may destroy the Death
you're
Star,
just giving,
or you may not
giving
destroy
a
the
free
Death
run
Star.
to figure out what your own questions are.
And there's one other aspect to it I'll bring up, is that in especially RPGs, but especially in board games are much smaller in terms of like a person sits down to play it and walks away. But everyone has to interact. One aspect of that, which you just brought up, is we're all reading the story together, but we're all interacting. So if all of us are playing characters, we all actually, if we play long enough, we're actually going to become friends regardless of the differences are between us, because we're all having to work together. The Band
to
of Brothers
depend on-
experience, right?
depend
But the
on
second
each other.
component of this is when he kills Bob, and my character doesn't like the idea of killing Bob, there's now interaction, and we have to have, now, it might be funny, or it might be dumb, but a lot of times, especially with the adults, we actually start to get into the politics of that. You shouldn't have killed Bob.
Right.
We need to have a conversation, and then that conversation grows up. So I agree with you very much, novels do that, but the advantage of a game is it's a cooperative experience where people not only have to think about their actions, but how other people are going to respond to them, and that immediately happens without real world consequence, which allows people to look into things that they would never do in real life. I'm not going to go up and stab someone, but in a game I'm going to stab someone because that's part of the game. But if other people don't want me to stab that person, what does that mean? If that really was my brother and you don't know,
And then I'll even do one better before I go to the next question. Take, for instance, Assassin's Creed.
Yeah.
Okay? That's another one that is a multi-simulated game in the sense that you're role-playing it, you have your mission to accomplish. You can walk through the village, you can talk to people all you want, but in this new Assassin's Creed, the Odyssey, you have other characters that are in the game with you, especially if you're playing online, who may say, I want your points. Now, if they come after you, you got to fight for your points, which happens in the role-playing games, and it starts you all over. And if you take a different route, may fight animals, but you might not have to fight people to accomplish your goal. So you choose your path. And in a sense that it can become diverse, because you may have people that just want to kill people. They're not even interested in slaying the Minotaur. You know what I'm saying? They may just laying in the cut to get you, and that's how they're enjoying that particular game. Now, we left out comic books, and I want to include comic books in this next conversation or this next question, because this is the main topic of the panel. We've exhausted a lot to get to where we are now. Sci-fi today, based on what we feel it should answer, how is it doing? Where are the good questions coming from? Are they coming from books still? Are they coming from film? Are they coming from comic books? Or are they coming from gaming? Or are there different questions being answered in each outlet? Or even audiobooks. I used to love the Deathland stories, but I don't know if they are advancing sci-fi. Where do you see the advancements of these questions being answered? Where are they? You may say it's role-playing games, but tell me and give me an example of that. You can go first now, Ken.
Well, I talked more than everybody else, so I'll make it short. I think that all of them are doing something. I think that the comic books are having the hardest time because they are being driven primarily by they're kind of building towards a global consensus agenda. So I think from their perspective, I think that they're all kind of going down the moralistic path much more than anything else at the moment. I think that the role-playing games give people the most ability to look into their own perspectives, and I think that the sci-fi novels generally and movies are showing people what could be or what is
So
currently
you think
existing.
they're answering different questions?
They're all each answering different questions would be the shorter answer.
Okay, what do you think?
I think most of the actual questions that are being asked and attempted to answer are really done in the literature right now. I think comics are doing a good job too. The problem with comics is that there are so many different comics out there doing different things, and only a few of them are really pushing the questions. And they're not always the popular ones. Same with the movies. The popular movies aren't always the ones asking all the
That's
questions.
my next question,
So
I'll tell
it's
you what.
action adventure is like, ooh, it's great. We get lots of fans in, and hopefully the fans come in and start saying, hey, let's read some more sci-fi and that, and look at comics, look at games and other things, and that's where they're going to see the questions. Because I don't think the actual social movement forward is going badly in films, but it's not going as well as it could.
Okay, Tony?
Comic books basically, and I don't know if I'm gonna phrase this correctly or not.
Don't worry, offend us.
Well, no, that's not it. I don't know
To
if I'm
speak
gonna
is
be
to
able
offend.
to convey my own thoughts properly. Comic books relegate current society
Okay.
through a science fiction or fantasy viewpoint.
Different from literature?
Well, take Fantastic Four,
Okay.
okay? They each have a different superpower. Dr. Richards, his, other than being a rubber band, is a super brain.
Okay.
So they're inventing all these scientific, futuristic gadgets to help them do their job, but it's all based on the storyline, which is reflecting current society or what's currently going on in the world.
I'm going to come back and I'm going to make an argument for literature.
And just
Okay.
to
Yes.
point out,
Yes.
what he said as far as the comics go.
Yes.
Look at Superman, look at Batman, look at all the main ones. They've been rebooted. Superman, people don't realize. this.
The
You're talking
reboot
about-
stuff. Yeah.
They've in the comics has been rebooted maybe 50 times.
Multiverse.
in 50
He's
years.
been multiverse.
He has
Absolutely.
changed.
He don't even know
So
who
as,
he
as
is.
the society changes, they just change how the superheroes are going.
Okay.
Yeah. So
And-
it's,
Wait till you
right,
see
it
the
follows-
black
it follows
Superman.
society.
And
Whoa.
They just talked about that.
Yep.
And you can't just relegate comic books because now your comic book heroes are your current hit films.
Okay, but pause. What's the number one sold comic book?
Superman.
Walking Dead, isn't it?
It's Walking Dead.
Walking Dead. And
That's not a
so,
comic book. That's some people drawing.
Well,
okay,
it's a comic
but at the
book.
end of the day, the post-apocalypse is a really big question, and that came not from literature, not from prose, not
George
from video
Romero
games,
is where it came from.
in a sense. But now The Walking Dead is exploring. It's not about zombies. I'm sorry if you like zombies; they are like the animals that are running by. Walking Dead is about Lord of the Flies.
Yeah, it is.
It is a social experiment in the post-apocalypse that was started in comic books. Yes, because when you talk about Negan, you talk about the governor, the survivor, you ain't talking about a different type of zombie. That's World War Z. That's Resident Evil. That's basic stuff. Walking Dead is a social experiment in what we're doing in the post-apocalypse, and the zombies just rush the conversation because you don't have all day just to sit
It
around.
allows you to have dramatic tension.
Right, yeah, it speeds it up, sets the pacing, even though they're walking.
Right.
So, and also when you expand comic books to include the non-superhero stuff, you have V for Vendetta, right? Which came from comic books.
fair enough.
Okay, so there's a lot of other conversations that's going on in comic books because I mostly do graphic novels myself, but now I'm getting more into the superhero comic book stories. But again, that's that, and that's still not the point I'm going to make. So James, go ahead, and then I want to
On
respond.
the comic books, I'm probably going to say a lot of the more conflicting thoughts on this because I think comic books have really suffered. They target social discourse, they target readership, and as you see, like just the DC, they revamped the whole line again after the 52.
Yeah.
You know, I maybe just want to,
Yeah,
yeah.
DC's
Get a
lost
little
their
violent.
Yeah.
DC's lost their
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah.
They've
And
been
then-
struggling before
and Then you
movies.
have,
Yeah,
you're gonna see
they're
the
having some
reflection of that
problems.
now in the movies, because now they're gonna be shifting out all these actors.
Right.
There's probably not gonna be, no spoiler here, but Captain America, it's probably gonna be somebody else soon. They don't know who, I don't think.
Well, there's
I'm
been
sure they do,
5
but the
Supermen,
main- yeah.
Supermans.
Yeah.
Right, and there's gonna probably be a new Batman because Ben Affleck's got, problems.
Yep.
Well, Ben Affleck never was Batman.
Yeah, yeah.
So says the Batman God.
Yeah.
I agree, I agree.
All of us gatekeepers are
I
comic book
think
people.
that, as weird as it may sound, I think the best dialogue is being opened up is the smaller presses, the allowance of the.
Dang, you stole my answer.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
They're the ones that are,
I was gonna
they're
get
the
you.
ones that are advancing the conversation, even though they don't
There's a good
have,
example.
even though they don't have the readership or the potential for growth as much as everybody else. But they're the greatest source and resource right now for it.
Okay. We have a question?
I guess what it encompasses a couple things. Number one, about the, why isn't sci-fi asking the big questions? Well,
Yes.
Sci-fi has been mainstreamed, okay?
That's my
Right.
next question.
Mainstream
Yep.
suffers from political correctness. In
Yep.
order to ask the big questions, you have to ask the uncomfortable questions.
Which was my first thing I said.
So it's.
Or the
it's one of those
controversial
things
questions.
That, when you're talking about the big mainstream companies, the movie, the studios, the brick and mortar, the big guys, it's all about the dollar.
Yep.
It truly is about the almighty dollar.
I'm going to
You know,
use that
and
as a segue.
but it has its place because without the almighty dollar, you're not there. But at the end of the day, it achieved that balance because when sci-fi first started, it was the ugly redheaded stepchild. Nobody wanted to claim that.
Nobody was buying a house off
as
sci-fi.
true.
Except Corey Ackerman.
But as,
That's
but I
actually
think
pretty good.
because of that pressure
Now you
to
can
break
buy a
out, to
mansion.
move forward, sci-fi did a lot of breakthrough stuff early on that we just took for granted, and we were riding this wave for a while, and now we've kind of stalled, so to speak, and we need to get that momentum back.
I look at the world, or let's not say the world, let's say America, the same way I look at like black people in a sense. Sometimes we had pre-existing issues that did not allow for us to deal with other issues. And while we were dreaming and speculating big universal questions, we had domestic issues that were more pressing. And now some of those domestic issues have subsided, and women can vote, and we have other things going on. So now we can, process these things and enjoy it. What I wanted to say to you, Tony, about literature and the superhero comic books is what I see in literature is a direct result to the free access to publishing and distribution in literature, meaning ebooks and KDB. Is that correct? Kindle Direct.
KDP.
Yeah.
KDP, right. I'm so bad with letters. But also because of internet and social media being global. So why
POV, publish on demand.
all of that direct, what that has done has allowed people to read people's thoughts from another part of the country, Google Translate, these other books, whereas we used to have gatekeepers in publishing that said, this book will not sell in this world, in this country. Now they can't stop you from reading it because you can get it off a recommended list in Australia, in South Africa, in South America, and you can get that book. And so what I think literature is doing for the sci-fi question is answering or giving us a survey of other cultures' answers to that question. And that is important for us. And it's happening with small press, whereas now Black Panther may say, change the publishers' minds and say, hey, we'll give, a black lead character's story a shot. But before that, We had to do it through small press. And why was that important? Because that black character or that female character had an opinion about the future that was important for us to include in our answer or include factor in to our plans or whatever it is in our strategy for the future. Because if we're just asking men these questions, white men these questions, we're not getting all of the potential answers. And our survey is skewed. So now we need to have answers from India, from China, from Africa and South America. So that's why I think literature is doing that. It's easy, it's cheap. You only have to pay for an editor, and if you don't, you can use Grammarly or something like that. Or you could just have a good story written bad. It can be 50 Shades of Grey.
There you go.
One thing you said is about the small press.
Yes.
Is, I would think go back to comic books. So think about up until the huge run on comic collecting in the 70s and 80s. Technically, comics were small press. They weren't that big. They were controlled a lot, so that limited what they could do because of the comic code. But they were a small press trying to push things forward.
And the thing is, like with comic book, it requires you to be an illustrator. And that's a creative person, but it cuts out a lot of people who can't draw. Film, you have to have film and you have to do stuff with technology, and it requires money and set and actors. Writing is the cheapest form. Good. So this is my last question, and I'm coming up.
Can I say something real
Yes.
quick? And also respond to what you had said about
figured you were
mainstream and
about
how it dominates. 10, 15 years ago, you couldn't walk down the fantasy aisle in a bookstore and see that the main characters were female because there was such a huge push for female leads and strength, and it totally dominated what would go on like a Barnes & Noble shelf. And that was one of the huge effect that mainstream did have.
Wow. So now, building off of what our audience member, Ms. Glinda, said, was my last question, and then we'll wrap it up. I want to thank you all for being good panels. We always go places that I don't think any of us expected.
Right.
So that's when you have a good panel. So it was good to me. I hope it was good to you. The effect of commercialism, the effect of political correctness, this fear of offending people and destroying your brand, right? That barrier that we have. What impact is it having on our questioning, asking the questions that we need to have to ask or that we should have to ask? Is it aiding? I mean, of course, I like CGI. And I definitely love the big budget movies. I like the IMAX theaters and things like that. And it's getting people who probably didn't have that much of imagination to come out and enjoy some sci-fi. So it's reaching a broader audience, right?
Sure.
A comic book is a hit, sells 5,000 copies.
Sure.
Movie has to sell millions of tickets. So the reach on books are 10,000 and are on the bestsellers list. I don't know what it is for games.
Yeah, board games are 20,000. And
So-
RPGs are like 1,000.
So movies and television
particularly hard
shows,
for RPGs.
because of the commercialism, they have to appeal to everybody. That's why you saw Black Panther probably before you saw it in a book, because they had to bring in all of those audiences.
Right.
How do you think commercialism is impacting the questions that we need to have in sci-fi? Is it helping? Is it hurting? Yes.
Okay,
And last question, that was it.
a very simple response to that is your commercially successful mainstream studio films aren't going to ask those questions because they're looking, as you say,
The bottom line.
for ticket sales. If you want those good questions asked and you want to see them asked properly, you need to go to independent film.
Okay. And film festivals and stuff.
Yeah.
James?
Yeah, I think commercialism, unfortunately, since it's driving the thought, it's not going to help. I think it struggles. I think it struggles everything.
Strangles,
You need
not
strangles, and it's that along with because a lot of funding now was government based, like with NASA and all that, where they got strangled, and without and I'm gonna drop a horrible name in some people's mind, Elon Musk, people who are those entrepreneurs, those philanthropists that have the funds to go out there and take it to that next level.
It's not gonna happen.
That's right.
Alvin,
Again, and same as Elon
let's
Musk,
get to the last.
the media, the movies, take this to people that would never see it before.
Okay.
So in that, it's a good thing, but like he said, they're never gonna answer the questions. You can only hope that those people that have never seen this stuff before will try to come back to literature, the earlier comic books, small press, something else, so they can learn a lesson, because they're not gonna learn it from the movie. We're just hoping it's, like was used, the term used between Star Wars and Star Trek in one of my other panels, Star Wars is the gateway drug. Hopefully then people will pay attention to something else.
Yeah.
The
Gateway
movies are
drugs
the
are
gateway
good.
drug.
I'm going to answer the question in two different
Ken,
ways.
take it
So
away.
you actually asked two questions in one, right?
Yes.
You basically asked, is political correctness and also is commercialism,
Money.
what are their effects, right? So they're actually two different things. I come from a different perspective because I'm a Southern white guy, and I have a family that is Southern and white. So I
Okay.
have a lot of red people on the red-blue political perspective.
yes.
I'll tell you a flat-out truth on them, is that they don't discuss their thoughts anymore openly because they feel like the media and people around them will immediately judge them negatively. And what that happens is that's oppression in a different way. So America has free speech, but the rest of the world doesn't, right? Even Canada and England don't. So the people who have different thoughts no longer are openly expressing them. And in the past, if you think about it, people who thought new thoughts often died because the society no longer was happy with them.
You are talking to a black guy.
I know. So that's why I'm saying it right to you. So I think that they're two different things. Commercialism pushes what the general populace is being told to believe, which is what the media is controlling us now. It used to be the government was the probable oppressor, but now it's YouTube, it's the studios, it's the people who can control what you can see, right? So you were saying everybody can go grab a book. Well, I'll tell you the truth. If I go and try to read a book from somebody who is what a YouTube is happy with, somebody who's on the far left, they'll get 5 million views because everybody's search engine allows you to go see them.
Right.
But if I have somebody on the right who might have a different view, it's not a bad view, it's not a negative view towards anyone else, it's just YouTube's labeled them as somebody they don't like. Now there might be 1,000 views for the exact same level of content. So I think it's actually hurting because people as soon as you bring any level of oppression for whatever reason into the conversation, it will stifle people's views. Well, if we want to further the sci-fi questions, right? I come back to my original thought. What are the advantages of actually just listening to those views and finding out? The conversation is discourse over long periods of time. Sci-fi is as well. To answer your question, I think it harms our long-term ability because if we have 1 million people and you oppress 400,000 of them's opinion to think about future things. I'm not talking about political things.
Right.
I'm just talking about what they think. How are you affecting those 400,000? What if one of those 400,000 people has a thought that would save us all, but we don't get to hear it because society says it's not interesting to hear because the gatekeepers, the new gatekeepers, are holding that back.
Well, I'll end on that. Thank you very much. I'm an optimist, so I'm going to come up
good.
with an argument to make it more optimistic.
I wasn't trying to be negative.
No. But, sometimes it's important. But I want to thank you all. We are right on time. So that's the end of our panel. Please check us out.
Might be the